Okay, this is our second video for the Europe and Russian realm. And in this video, I want to talk briefly about the physical context of the region and support what I did in the last one regarding latitude. When we think about these two regions, one of the things I want you to first get a handle on is the size of the regions. And if we think about that, one of the things that you're going to notice is that in the case of Europe, what I've done here is I've superimposed the major state, I shouldn't say the major, the larger states of Europe onto the map of the United States. And that, what you can see here with, again, France, United Kingdom, Germany, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium is that, in fact, if we even put all of these on, in the United States, we can take up all of those countries and have plenty of room to spare. So Europe, from the standpoint of a physical space, is really quite small. In contrast, when we look at Russia, you'll notice, again, what I've done is the same thing here. I've superimposed Russia onto North America in this case, and what you can see is that, in fact, Russia is significantly larger than the United States, and in fact is nearly two-thirds the size of Russia or of the United States and Canada combined, the second largest landmass in the world. Now, when we look at the area physically, what I want to kind of have you think about is how both your textbook and then kind of how the overall idea of Europe can be understood from a physical landscape standpoint. Your textbook looks at Europe from the standpoint of major landform regions, and I think these are efficient to work with. I'm going to point out a couple of things, and then we'll move on from there. First of all, what I want you to understand is this area of the Western Highlands. And in fact, really, the Western Highlands are an arc of high plateaus and mountainous regions that extend from the Arctic Circle, in fact, well above the Arctic Circle in the Scandinavian Peninsula, through the Scottish Highlands, much of Ireland, and in fact can be understood as part of the Iberian Peninsula as well. Then we have a second component, which is the Alpine region, and that includes the Alps proper, the Apennines, the Pyrenees, the Carpathians, and then the Dinaric Alps and the Balkan Peninsula. Just to the north of that Alpine region, we have the central uplands, and then, of course, we have this broad belt of northern lowlands. Now, what I want to do next is kind of pull these pieces apart and understand what they really mean. So, if we look at the region again, what I want you to think about are a few things in terms of how the landscape is divided. When we look at it overall, what I want you to think about are these belts of mountains or orogenies. And so again, you'll notice the spine of the Scandinavian Peninsula extending across the North Sea into the Scottish Highlands, the high plateaus of Spain, and then of course the Pyrenees that divide, again, this major idea, which is the Iberian Peninsula, that is Spain and Portugal, from the rest of Europe. In the same way, we can see the Alps again, this east-west arc here, that kind of curves around and then becomes part of the Apennines, again, the boot of Italy. Then, if we move to the south, we have the Balkan division and the Carpathians. And again, so what you'll notice is the Alps, in association with the Apennines, kind of form this kind of arcuate shape, a reverse C, and then a regular C, and then these long chains. The other major point that I want to note is the divide between Europe and Asia. And one of the classic divides is the Urals. And again, you'll see the Ural Mountains divide European Russia from Asiatic Russia, and then the Caucasus that divide Europe essentially from the Middle East. Now we can move forward and we can look at these and kind of their important ideas. So again, I want to just focus the Pyrenees, again, a largely east-west trending mountain that divides Spain and Portugal from the rest of Europe. The Alps proper that form kind of the central spine of Central Europe. The Apennines running down again, the peninsula of Italy, And then we have the Balkans that essentially divide the Balkan region, the southern Balkans, Greece, Macedonia, Bulgaria, etc., from the rest of Europe, and then the Carpathians. So again, these very complex systems of mountains. And then far to the east, you'll notice the Caucasus again here, coming off the Black Sea. If we look in the north again, remember we have the divide of the Urals, the Scandinavian mountains, that spine of the Scandinavian peninsula that extends effectively into the Scottish Highlands. Now, the other aspect that we can understand about Europe proper is the importance of rivers, and we're going to see this later on, but what I wanted you to note here is if I kind of run along this peninsular region, when you see it this way, think about Europe as really a peninsula of the Eurasian landmass sticking out into the Atlantic. And we can see this complex of subpeninsulas, again, the Scandinavian peninsula here, the Iberian Peninsula here, the Italian or Apennine Peninsula here, and the Balkans. Well, the other thing that we'll notice is that there's a remarkably complex system of rivers that are really quite efficient in moving from the interior of this peninsula to the coast. You notice again, if we literally go up these rivers that many of you have heard of, the Ebro, the Loire, the Seine, the Rhine, the Oder, the Vistula, the Danube, the Danube, again, one of the perhaps the most important of these European rivers, all running to major water bodies. And so the rivers became an incredibly important part of navigation, transportation, and in fact commerce in Europe. And when we look at Russia, this changes a bit. Russia also has a significant system of rivers, all of which run for the most part north to south. But in terms of the Russian rivers, they all run for the most part from the south to the north, making them somewhat less important or less effective in terms of transportation, although they certainly were used internal to the continent. The other thing I want to point out as we look at the Russian realm are the characteristics of its landscape. First of all, you'll notice that in the east it is much, much higher in altitude, and then as we move towards the West Siberian plains, much, much lower in elevation. So again, following this major river system, we'll notice that, again, interior rivers running to the Arctic. The Ural Mountains dividing the system here, and most importantly, St. Petersburg as a port city into the Baltic Sea. The other important point that should be noted is this area here, the Kamchatka Peninsula, a major peninsula in the Pacific that extends into the Kuril Islands and in fact connects in some respects physiographically eastern Russia into the Japanese archipelago. All right, in terms of land use, kind of the last point I want to make in terms of physiography is that if you'll notice this, most of everything that you see tan here is largely agricultural. And what you can notice is that with the exception of our major alpine belts, and again you can see quite clearly the Apennines, the Pyrenees, the Alpine system here, the Dinarics, the Carpathians, all of these systems, the Caucasus again of course here, with the exception of the alpine systems, much of the land has been significantly converted to agriculture. Europe is, if not urbanized, it is an agricultural landscape. Very little of its original forest cover remains. Now, I want to talk a little bit again, in our first discussion we talked about latitude and climate, but I want to kind of emphasize it right here. What you see in these are two images of the globe, and what you see here is the ocean sea surface temperature, red being warmest, and this is actually done today, warmest water, and you'll notice that in terms of Europe, warm water extends well up into the Scandinavian peninsula. You'll notice that the Arctic Ocean, there's a rather significant divide between Arctic waters and the waters here. And in fact, again, notice this extremely warm water extending well into the Mediterranean. So as a result of this temperate or moderate water temperatures, what we see is that the land temperatures are controlled or at least influenced by that. What you'll notice here is this is land temperatures or overall air temperatures. And you'll notice that even today, when it's very, very cold in North America, much of Europe, here is the Iberian Peninsula, and we can see it extending well up. These moderate temperatures extend far into Europe. But we can also see here is Russia, that in fact this continental landmass, the farther we get from water, the colder the air becomes. And we can see these dramatically cold temperatures in central Russia extending into Eastern Europe. So proximity to water matters. Okay, that's the end of the physical context. We'll pick this up with historical and cultural context in the next discussion.